can I just introduce myself? I'm Brian Spears, the president of the CLA, and this is a pretty amazing technological achievement event this morning, because we have participating by Zoom a number of people attending this LexisNexis Rule of Law breakfast. So we'll see how the technology works. Just to let you know that after one or two opening remarks from me, then I'll be introducing the guys that you see on screen to bring their particular greeting. You will know that the Commonwealth Lawyers Association is very much a rule of law based organization. And that is a convenient phrase and a much used phrase. But what, in fact, does it mean? When we talk about the rule of law, in what areas of life does it address? And are there aspects of rule of law that we can be acquainted with afresh to give us a renewed understanding? So we have this morning two speakers, one via Zoom, who is Mr. Ian McDougall, and one in the room, who is Miss Berchelle Wilson, an associate at McKinney, Bancroft and Hughes, one of the conference sponsors. A principal sponsor of the conference is LexisNexis. And I say publicly to you and to them that we hugely appreciate their sponsorship of this conference. And we are very grateful indeed for their support, not just financially, but organizationally, through webinars that we have jointly run with them, through their global network of rule of law organizations, and for their help during this conference. So we really do appreciate the LexisNexis people. We have on screen Nigel Martin, who might give a wave, but I don't think you're speaking, Nigel, but look at that, the powers of technology, waving in slow motion. And but our principal speaker this morning is Mr. Ian McDougall. He is the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for LexisNexis, and in fact, President of the LexisNexis Rule of Law Foundation, a non-profit charitable organization designed specifically to advance the rule of law. Ian has occupied a number of roles in LexisNexis, but before joining that organization, occupied a number of prominent positions at a senior level in business, including being Chief European Counsel for Hughes Electronics, a former subsidiary of General Motors. Ian sits on the United Nations Rule of Law Steering Committee and is a member of the UN General Assembly Advisory Board. They had planned, like so others, to be here in person, where their vivacity would have further illuminated our conference, but like so many others, were thwarted by travel restrictions and the like. So I'm now going to invite Ian to speak and present to us, and we hope that it all works seamlessly. Ian, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me, and hopefully you can see the slide that is appearing. Excellent, thank you. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. As Brian mentioned, I have the good fortune to be the General Counsel for Lexis and the President of the Foundation. And as if to confirm it, it says it in writing, so it must be true there. It's up on the screen. Now, I really sort of want to start by, as Brian left off, really, let me start by doing something that I always do when I talk about the rule of law, because I think it's important to try and get on the same page. Now, I often joke that if I asked 7 lawyers for a definition about the rule of law, I'd get 8 different definitions. So it's important to start, I think, by saying exactly what we're talking about, and then to talk about the direct links between the advancements in the rule of law and economic growth and building global stability. The rule of law is not just a nice to have, it's an absolute necessity for success. And I know a lot of these points I may well be talking to a room full of the converted already, but I do think it's important for us to really establish its importance, and then what we can do about it. And another thing that's worth mentioning, I think, is that the rule of law is not just an issue for so-called developing countries. It's under constant threat in many countries of the world, developed or developing. And I think we're only now waking up to the fact that we must be vigilant everywhere. We've seen over the course of recent history how even democratic countries can fall foul of not really adhering to the rule of law particularly well. And so advancing the rule of law is the mission that really drives us at Lexis every day. So the rule of law, as far as we are concerned, is a set of principles that provides the foundation for developing peaceful, equitable, prosperous societies. You have there the 4 elements, the 4 pillars, we often refer to them, of the rule of law. At its core, it basically means that no one is above the law. We think of the rule of law, as I say, as having transparency, meaning everyone can have access to the law. There are no secret laws, and you'll see as well that a number of these general categories also cover a number of subcategories. So, for example, transparency of law would imply a rule against retrospective legislation, for example, because clearly at the time that the person was concerned, it wasn't transparent. Equality for all under the law. That means everyone has to be treated the same, no matter who you are, president or citizen, monarch or subject. No matter who you are subject to the same law and are treated the same. Now, of course, that requires ultimately an independent judiciary, that is a judiciary not influenced by other parties and that makes judgments solely on the basis of the law and the facts. Crucial. And then finally, access to remedy, as we call it, meaning individuals have to have access to timely resolution in a court of law administered by an independent judiciary with transparent laws and being treated equally. So these are this is the basic definition that LexisNexis used. And I'm very pleased to say that it's the more I speak around the world about these kind of things, the more the power of this definition is really taking hold. It's simple, it's fairly easy to remember, and it doesn't require any kind of specific political structure or any kind of other organizational rule. It requires that you follow these rules. And if I could just briefly say, I was once fortunate enough to be giving a speech at the UN when the ambassador to Sudan stood up and said, well, we suspect that this is a Trojan horse for regime change. And I replied to him that if he could tell me anywhere amongst these 4 pillars that refers to or requires regime change, then I would agree with him. And I suppose lucky for me, he sat down. Now, here's an important thing. In order to stop the rule of law just becoming a vague aspiration, we certainly at Lexis think that measuring and analytics are crucial. I suppose we should do as lawyers require evidence for what we're saying. To paraphrase the scientist Lord Kelvin, when you can put a number to something, you have a much more exact level of knowledge about it. Now, we can measure how countries perform on the rule of law. The World Justice Project provides the Rule of Law Index covering over 120 countries. That index is based on more than 120,000 different data points, and 4,000 legal practitioners contribute to it. So it's pretty extensive. The survey measures the rule of law based on factors such as constraints on government powers, the protection of fundamental rights, and regulatory enforcement. Now, on top of this, and these are the graphs that you are looking at, our team did some analysis correlating these rule of law rankings with economic and social data. Along the horizontal axis, we plotted countries based on their rule of law index scores measured by the World Justice Project, and the vertical axis it shows countries based on the various different quality of life metrics, if you like. We've got GDP per capita, a point which I'll come back to in a minute, life expectancy, we have child mortality rates and corruption, and these are produced by combining various different bits of data from various sources. And the interesting thing is that it shows a correlation way beyond statistically significant between the rule of law and various socio-economic measures. But high rule of law, interestingly, is correlated with high GDP per capita, as well as high life expectancy. In countries where the rule of law is stronger, so are all of the socio-economic measures. We can see then, to put some numbers on what this means, that strengthening the rule of law by around 10% of the measure can increase per capita GDP by $7,000. Now, if you imagine that there are many countries around the world whose current per capita GDP isn't a tenth of that. Now, what we are saying is that that's the increase, not the total. That is how much you increase per capita GDP by improving the rule of law measure in those countries. A 30% drop in crime rates, a 30% plus reduction in infant mortality, saving millions of children's lives, and an increase of at least 2 years in life expectancy. So this data we think is really important because it backs up with real meaningful statistics what we know, I think, instinctively, that without the rule of law, economies have a hard time developing. Those that are developed can go backwards, and the citizens of those countries suffer greatly, disproportionately. But it also adds another dimension to our case because it gives us the chance to appeal directly to self-interest. And let's not be afraid of doing that. You have more money in your pocket as a result of strong rule of law. Let's not shy away from appealing both to our better natures and to our self-interest. Now, 5 billion people around the world today live outside the protection of the rule of law. And we want to bring this number down to 0 through both our day-to-day business operations and also products and services, as well as through the foundation. Now, I spoke a moment ago about transparency. And of course, transparency means being able to access the law as easily as possible. Now, our content obviously does this. We, for example, add 1.7 million new legal documents to the database daily. I think through these capabilities, we're able to deliver legal insights which weren't imaginable years ago. The technology that's able to link information is really crucial and is becoming ever more important. We provide access to legal information in over 160 countries. And as I say, that enhances the rule of law around the world. But one thing that I think is important, and why this online information is so important, is because increasingly in developing countries, they are bypassing the development stage, which went through huge amounts of paper, and the development stage, which went through huge amounts of information by wire. In many countries, these things are being bypassed, and now people are going straight to mobile devices to look up what the law is. And it's important that the providers of such information are able to cater for how these places are developing, and so on. And increasingly, artificial intelligence will become important as well, not simply just because it's a better way to produce information, but because the nature of the way we work will start to change. Artificial intelligence will start to predict the information that you want. Artificial intelligence will start to feed it into your workflow. And all of these things will become increasingly important to the administration of justice. So thought it might be interesting to show a few practical examples so you can see what I mean about the content and global reach. I want to move on now to what we do and how we advance the rule of law. So not only publishing it, but also things like judicial training and helping independent judiciaries. We provide free resources to various organizations, civil rights organizations, etc. But this is just one of many examples. If I can move on to talk about a case study. In the US and the UK, for example, we have supported civil rights and making the legal system accessible for millions of users. We're committed to doing that, supporting inclusion and racial diversity. In response to the extraordinary events of 2020, we developed resources to safeguard civil rights and provide transparency into legislative responses. One of these is a free regulatory tracker, which provides visibility into government actions relating to police reform. We recently released a police misconduct module in our litigation analytics product, drawing insight from over 60,000 cases. Another case study, digitization. For example, in Sierra Leone, we found that legal aid workers could only access a single set of law books that were having to be shipped around the country. So literally the legal process came to a halt until that one set of law books could be physically transported to the different locations that it was required. Clearly not a sensible way to administer the system. And so we digitized and provided 24/7 access to those laws. And since then, they've been able to triple the caseload and dramatically expand access to justice across the country. To promote access to an independent judiciary, our team literally ventured into the jungles of Borneo as part of a mobile court program. They slept in tents by night and ran the court by day and handled more than 170 cases. One young girl, just as an example, received her birth certificate during that trip. Now, why is that important? Well, she had attended school, but could not take exams because she couldn't prove her identity. And a very simple situation like this that can be resolved by these sort of activities. Her life was changed in a day with a single legal document that most of us take for granted. Okay, so as I say, we believe as well that real progress comes from working together. We have a sort of a two-phase approach to trying to advance the rule of law, which is, number one, we try to deploy our core skills, to take what we're already good at and try and deploy them in advancing the rule of law through one or more of the four pillars. And also our second point is to work with partners who can bring something to the table, something to the project, whatever that may be. And so we believe that has a significant effect, because we can deliver expertise with partners where it's actually needed, rather than, as unfortunately is in the case many times otherwise, people do wonderful good work, they raise money, sponsored bike rides and all of these kind of wonderful things, they write out a check and really never see the impact or have any impact on the impact that all of that effort goes to. So we believe very much in trying to use core skills in order to do what we do. And here are some examples that you can see up on the screen. We've collaborated extensively with the United Nations to advance the rule of law. In 2013, we approached the Secretary General, who was then Ban Ki-moon, to develop the Business for the Rule of Law framework. And we jointly launched that framework in 2015. As you heard, I'm fortunate to have been a member of that committee. We're also only one of 3 businesses serving in the UN Global Alliance that facilitates SDG 16 reporting. That's the Justice SDG. Now, again, this is really important. Data, as far as we're concerned, is crucial to being able to move the needle. So promoting accountability on SDG 16, we're building towards a world really with peaceful and just societies. Through the Rule of Law Foundation, we're working with the International Bar Association to achieve gender parity in the legal profession. We've launched a 9-year global study to uncover the causes of gender inequalities in law leadership. And the result of this initiative, hopefully, will be a blueprint for achieving gender parity in the legal profession. Well, by 2030, but let's hope we can be quicker than that. And we recently signed a multi-year agreement to collaborate with the National Bar Association. That's the largest US network of predominantly African-American attorneys and judges in the United States. And with this partnership, we're working together on programs and initiatives to close, we hope, the racial divide. For example, we're currently developing thought leadership on protecting election rights, and look forward to the real and meaningful change that we can help to make together. Some people have actually said to me in the past, but what if your core skills as a company are not directly connected to the rule of law as much as LexisNexis? To me, the answer is actually very simple. All companies have skills that they often take for granted, but they can be deployed to advance the rule of law. I have 2 examples to give you. Let's take a tobacco company. You might instantly ask, how on earth can producing tobacco help advance the rule of law? Well, clearly, producing tobacco doesn't. But let's take what those companies are good at: lobbying. They can still sell tobacco in many countries because they're great lobbyists. They can certainly deploy that skill to advance the rule of law whenever they are engaging with governments or other authorities, to use their lobbying skills to get across the message of the importance of the rule of law. Let's take the example of one which is in the United Nations information. It's one of those that we were able to collect. A company that produces motorbikes, for example. A motorbike company, how can a motorbike company help advance the rule of law? Well, they discovered a project whereby a group of lawyers were trying to deliver pro bono legal advice in very difficult to get to remote areas. And they were able to donate some motorbikes that made it possible for those lawyers to actually get to the places that they were trying to get to. So my point is, just for those 2 examples, is I believe that no matter what industry you are in, it is possible to advance the rule of law. And if you remember a moment ago, I said, and it is in your self-interest to do so, because if nothing else, of its impact on per capita GDP. So at Lexis, we've got tremendous pride, obviously, in the work that we do to advance the rule of law. That's the mission that really does drive the company every day. And I can tell you that certainly since I was fortunate enough to, for example, lead the Rule of Law Foundation, the amount of goodwill, the good feeling, whatever you want to call it, the motivation of the employees, and in fact, everyone who works with Lexis, not only for Lexis, is absolutely tremendous. When people see the kind of impacts that we can have around the world and how they can contribute to it, I think it really does. To be, again, in self-interested, it helps with recruitment, it helps with retention, it helps with people really being proud to be part of the company that they work for. And so I think it is a privilege for me, certainly, to be able to work in a place that really feels its higher purpose. And I hope we can find a way of working together. That, in my opinion, this time in the world, the Commonwealth Lawyers Association has the potential to make a huge impact. It can step into a big gap at the moment in leadership of advancing the rule of law around the world, and using its influence across the Commonwealth, I think, is really a fundamental way that it can make a difference, and I hope it does so. And so with that, I believe I've probably taken up more of my time than I should have done. So I'm very happy to hand over. I think I'm handing over to Birchall Wilson. But I'm happy to simply stop there.
Ian, thank you very much. I imagine people, just to show that they have been listening, might want to show a round of applause.
Thank you very much. That's kind.
So we now have a very pleasingly full room, Ian. One or two remarks just before I introduce our next speaker. During your remarks, you mentioned about artificial intelligence. Amazingly enough, the plenary session that we will leave this room to go to is exactly on artificial intelligence and its impact on the legal profession. You mentioned mobile courts, and we have a session in the conference relating to the access to justice does not discourage or require people to come to justice, because it can go to the people. And we've an amazing example that I've heard Ian speak of before, of his Borneo tent project for bringing justice and access to justice to the people. Yesterday, we had a session on sexism in the law, and therefore I was very alert to your project to ensure gender equality. And when you speak of the possibility of influence for the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, well, we have the Secretary General of the Commonwealth here, and we have met with her. She has mingled with the guests, and she has given a powerful welcome and a magnificent keynote address yesterday. So with that, to move us into out of the Zoom, but into the room, I'm now going to introduce our next speaker before we head off to our plenary session. So Birchall Wilson is an associate at McKinney, Bancroft and Hughes, a prominent firm in Nassau, the Bahamas, and one of our sponsors. And we're absolutely delighted that this superb firm with a wide reach of legal advice and services has been one of our sponsors, and it's a great delight to welcome one of their associates to the podium. I've got a lot of information about Birchall, but an associate in a prominent law firm with a whole range of legal qualifications and involvement in the legal community in the Bahamas. And we loved having you at our dinner that LexisNexis provided last night, Birchall, and we look forward to your remarks. Could I invite you to come to the microphone, please?
Good morning, everyone. Everyone in the room, everyone. Good afternoon to everyone via Zoom, those joining us from across the pond. So from Ian's remarks, you have probably figured out with the rule of law, while it is this lovely term that invokes a lot of enthusiasm, it requires practical efforts, like the efforts of groups such as LexisNexis, to take it from a principle and put it into practice. As attorneys, it is our daily obligation to see to the furtherance of the rule of law in any way possible. So the question, therefore, is how can we, as attorneys, advance the rule of law in our everyday life? So I'm going to briefly discuss 4 ways which any attorney can put into practice as to how we can move the rule of law forward. Firstly, is the participation in civil society organizations and other community-based programs. There are numerous organizations within your local community who often require assistance, whether it be representation, legal advice, or adding to drafting whatever documents they may need. Most of these organizations are nonprofits. They don't have the resources and they cannot afford to hire firms to do this work for them. So we can assist by giving our time and just volunteering to take that load off of them. In my personal experience, I've worked with an NPO who simply just needed their bylaws drafted. And it was a tedious process. It took about 1.5 years of meetings, but in the end, they were able to have these bylaws drafted, submit them to the government, and the government was able to pass them into legislation. So they now have force behind whatever it is they want to do. The second way we can assist is activity in legal associations and contributing to local publications, such as the CLA or your local bar association. Activity in these associations raises grassroots initiatives within the profession, which can translate into real conversation with legislators. As you see at this conference, it's not only attended by lawyers, it's attended by judges, it's attended by persons who are even in a legislative capacity. So being a part of associations such as this, getting involved with the discussion, having those dialogues, assist in pinpointing the areas within the law that need to be addressed. And by writing in your local publications, it raises awareness of issues with the public, with the layman who would not know exactly that this is an area that I need to pay attention to. This is something I did not know was going on. And this helps to increase what Ian was discussing as transparency of the law. Not all the time the public is aware of every little detail that goes into the law. And it's our obligation at times to bring that to the forefront. So essentially, it's a twofold process. It's discussion at the professional level and awareness at the public level. The third way in which we can assist in advancing the rule of law is in our daily practice. As everyone knows, a basic pillar of the rule of law is a respect for the law, a respect that everyone must have for the law. So it must firstly start with us. As attorneys, we know our duty is firstly to the court and then to our client. So by respecting our legal code of conduct, whichever you may have in your jurisdiction, while also upholding your client's legal interests, it exemplifies the rule of law in action. Furthermore, there is a large sect of the public who hold negative opinions of attorneys and the profession, and more often than not, the opinion is sometimes justified and based on personal experience. So we're not helping ourselves at times when we don't abide by the rules that were placed over us. If we expect the public to respect the general rule of law, we have to first start by respecting the rule of law that's put the laws that are placed on us. That means our basic codes of conduct, whichever you guys may have in your jurisdiction. And this brings in the equality aspect that no one is above the law, regardless of whichever law we're speaking of in that context. The last way in which we can advance the rule of law is a big one. It is legal aid and pro bono work. This goes to the access to legal remedy sectors. Volunteering your time and effort to give advice or representation to an everyday citizen is a vital aspect of the rule of law. As I mentioned with the organization, the NPOs, everyday citizens can't afford sometimes to hire an attorney to pay the legal fees it requires. Some can't even afford to pay the court fees it requires. So this is a way where we can step in to give our time to these people in need. Numerous organizations have their own legal aid initiatives, and programs are always looking for legal professionals to lend their time to persons who really can't afford it. In my experience, I've participated in several legal aid clinics, and in my experience, the most common issues people want help with are probate issues and family issues. And these issues go to the heart of a person's life, their equality of life, and how they move about daily. So, and this is just speaking for in the Bahamas, it may be different in other countries, but it's my belief that if we are able to address some of these family issues, some of these nuclear issues that every basic person is going to encounter at some point in their life, it can help to improve their equality of life. And go back to some of the notes Ian mentioned in terms of when we improve a person's quality of life. So this list that I've given you, while it's not exhaustive, I'm certain there are other ways you can fill in the gaps, but to help advance the rule of law. And as members of the profession, the onus is on us to find these gaps, whatever they may be, and fill in as much as possible. So it goes back to an old adage, is to just get involved in any way possible that you can. Those are my brief remarks. If there are any questions for either myself or Ian, I think Brian will let us know.
So brilliant remarks from Berchel. I'm going to just take a photo of the room, if you don't mind. That's excellent, as a souvenir of the occasion. So we have a small amount of time, not a huge amount of time, and there's an eager hand or two up who will want a question. Do we have a roving mic at the back? Excellent. Well, if you don't mind bringing it to the speaker. While you're doing that, can I just say that from the Sunday of the conference, we had a young lawyers program, and contributing to the profession was one of the messages that I brought us to how to feel fulfilled in your career, to put something back in. In the room, we have at least one Chief Justice. We have judges of the High Court. We have the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, who I acknowledge. We have a very senior Director of Commonwealth Secretariat, Professor Franceschi. And at one stage, we had the Chair of the Bar Council of England and Wales, and many others. In this distinguished gathering, I'm going to invite questions or comments, and if you could give us your name and where you're from, and then make your comment. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you to all the speakers. That was brilliant. I have a comment and an observation, please. My name is Eileen Schofield. I'm an employment solicitor based in the West Midlands in Birmingham, or West Midlands in the UK, and I'm also representing Birmingham Law Society. So my thoughts and comments really are in respect of the final piece with relation to pro bono and legal aid. I'm afraid I have a real bugbear with regard to the prospect of lawyers, most of us do pro bono work as we do, taking over the responsibility of the legal aid obligation which the government should provide. I've long canvassed and lobbied governments about increasing legal aid budgets, and particularly for family law matters and also criminal law matters particularly. But the legal aid budget has reduced significantly, and it's a really, really difficult argument to get over, certainly in the UK, to governments that by reducing legal aid budgets, that really does affect the most vulnerable people in society. We, particularly for family matters, if you like to look at those outside of the criminal matters, we're exposing people to risk of getting outside of the system, and some very bad decisions being taken because participants in cases are not properly represented because they either don't qualify for legal aid and also can't afford proper legal representation, which is where the pro bono piece comes in. And that's a really, really important supporting mechanism, but it ought not to be the primary mechanism. So I guess that's my observation comment. I guess my question is, what can we do? Is there anything we can do within our organisations to continue to lobby governments collectively to make sure that those people who need legal support and where they can't access their own funds to pay for it are properly represented and therefore better access to justice?
Well, thank you for that contribution. Can I just acknowledge that the Secretary General has arrived, and hopefully you'll get some breakfast, Your Excellency. This is a question that goes to the heart of access to justice. That it's all very well to have a court system, but if the citizen cannot access it through being unable to afford the legal representation, then surely that is justice denied. And I would be interested, Ian, if you had any comment on how do we improve the contributions from many countries in the Commonwealth that don't even come close to the meagre provision of legal aid that is available in the UK. Might you have a comment for us, Ian?
Yeah, I have a brief comment, and obviously in my position with Lexis, it's important for us to not get into a political arena. That's not our business. And in fact, the whole point of what we're trying to do with regard to advancing the rule of law is to actually take the politics out of it and to put the data into it. So what I would say is that there is clear evidence that investment in the system of that goes towards supporting the rule of law is crucial to a country's prosperity, crucial to its development or its continued prosperity. We would recommend that whatever system can be put in place to help give people access to remedy is not only beneficial to them, but it actually ends up being beneficial to society generally. And I think what we have to do with regard to governments all around the world is to start making the self-interest case. It is the right thing to do. Everybody is aware of that. But what we have to do, I think, is to unashamedly say that there is a return on this investment, and we have to start making the case to governments around the world that this has an impact, and it isn't hidden. It's direct, and I would suggest that's how we take the argument forward.
Yes, thank you. So often the legal aid question is framed as putting money into lawyers' pockets, whereas really it is a benefit for the citizen. And I think the argument needs to be reframed in that way. Now, does anyone else have a comment to make? We have colleagues, Mr. Stephen Twigg, who is the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, representing parliamentarians across the Commonwealth, another one of the accredited organisations in the Commonwealth Secretariat that the CLA has very recently worked closely with, partnered with, and are very much enjoying our close relationship with the CPA. So, Stephen, you flew in and arrived last night, but you're bright-eyed and alert enough to pose a question or make a comment. The microphone is with you. Let's hear it.
Thanks very much, Brian. Thank you for that generous introduction. I wanted to ask Ian a question about the relationship between the rule of law and democracy. I was very interested by his comment about the Sudanese ambassador and whether there was anything to fear from the rule of law. And I think he's absolutely right to say that even some of the most developed countries of the world have big challenges, the UK, the US, and so forth. But would there not be a similar correlation to the ones that he showed on the various graphs between having democratic elections and having an effective functioning system of rule of law?
Yeah,
interesting. Just interesting. The context, of course, is we have an election going on in the Bahamas, and there was a very gracious, I felt, acknowledgement of the democratic process from the Attorney General yesterday morning at our opening ceremony. So that's the question for you, Stephen, or for you, Ian.
Yeah.
From Stephen, what's your answer?
So two things I think are important here. First of all is that our program to try and advance the rule of law is a global one. We want to advance the rule of law around the world. And that means talking to governments of all kinds, shapes, and forms. And what we've tried to do, as I say, is to take the politics out of the rule of law and to talk about fundamentals, so that once you have these building blocks in place, you get development. And once you get development, well, then all kinds of other positive things start to happen. The other point is a technical point of definition, which is basically you can't have in a definition something which harms the thing you're trying to define. Now, over the course of the last couple of decades, what we've seen is the direct harm that some democratic processes have led to in the rule of law in some countries around the world. I won't name them, but we're talking about popular support for attacks on the judiciary. We're talking about popular support for attacks on minorities. Whilst it's probably, as Winston Churchill said, the least worst option ever tried, except for all the others, I think what we're trying to do is to say that to advance the rule of law from today, day one, that's not what we are arguing for. It's not necessary. You can implement the 4 pillars without that. Does it develop as a result of implementing the 4 pillars? Well, frankly, that's for that nation to decide and evolve on its own. What we want to do is to avoid the continuing trap of the past, which is the West telling the rest how to behave. That gets us nowhere. It's got us nowhere. And so we believe that by advancing the rule of law in this way, this is not an argument against democracy. Let me just be clear about that. This is an argument about how to advance the rule of law first.
Thank you, Ian. Again, we had a marvelous session yesterday entitled "Can Democracy Survive in the Face of Autocracy?" And some examples of jurisdictions which have perhaps failed the democratic test were given in that session. Now, I'm going to invite really just a final contribution, because we have our opening plenary for this morning coming up soon, but I think you'll agree we need to make space for a query or a comment from Her Excellency Baroness Scotland, who is going to make a comment.
Firstly, can I say that this session is incredibly important, and I'm really sorry that I had other business that I had to do, so I was a bit late. I think access to justice is of fundamental importance, and many of you will know that in the 2019 Law Ministers meeting, it was very much on our agenda, and I was very pleased to see that the President was there with us during that meeting. In 2008, the Commonwealth Law Ministers made a commitment to have a pro bono committee in every single Commonwealth country. Now, that commitment was made, and we know how difficult that can be, but we've refreshed that commitment in 2019. And I think there is a huge opportunity for us to come together to look at the framework legislation, the framework regulatory provisions that we all can share. So I think this is a huge opportunity for us to look at what joins us as opposed to what separates us. And we were talking just last night about whether it wouldn't be possible for us to renew a commitment that certainly I'd made when I was Attorney General, when we had both a national committee, pro bono committee, and an international pro bono committee. And we'd also I created something called Pro Bono Heroes, so that we could actually acknowledge. Now, pro bono should never, ever, ever be a substitute for legal aid, but in those cases where we have willing members of our profession who are determined to support the rule of law, this is something which I think we as a Commonwealth family can do together. And I'm really pleased to hear what LexisNexis has said, because maybe they would be willing to be our partners.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. And it's interesting just that there's an appetite in the room for comment. I wonder on your behalf, could I invite Ian to make any final summary remarks? But if you can keep them brief, Ian, because we're itching to get to our plenary session down the corridor. But if you could make a final remark, and then I'll thank you and the group and wind up.
Yes, I'll be as brief as I can. The important point about the definition that we've arrived at is that it isn't just us sitting in a room making it up. We did some extensive research going back through history, from things like the Code of Hammurabi through to the Upanishad writings in India, the main philosophical thoughts of the Hindu philosophers, right the way through to Islamic scholarship, etc. And so the point about the four parts of the rule of law, and it sort of relates back to my earlier comment, is that we believe that this is genuinely a global concept. It doesn't belong to one part of the world. It doesn't belong to one culture or one history or tradition. And so if we can make that clear too, I think we will make some considerable advances around the world. And also, please don't forget, let's not be afraid to say that to everyone, this is in your self-interest. It's both the right thing to do and it's the profitable thing to do. And I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much. And certainly some of that information about how states prosper where the rule of law flourishes is perhaps the biggest takeaway from our interesting breakfast meeting. Can I thank on your behalf in the room the generous sponsorship and technical wizardry that LexisNexis has put together. We greatly appreciate that support. And can I thank Nigel Roberts, who is lurking off camera, with whom we have a really strong relationship, which we appreciate. Ian, you have inspired us and challenged us and provided us with magnificent information to take away into our day. And Berchelle, the future of the rule of law in the Bahamas is very safe in your young hands, and we commend you for your wonderful contribution